This is the Discuss Metal Podcast with Joshua Toomey of Talk Toomey and Primer 55. Hosted by Dan Terry. Presented by discussmetal.com.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Discuss Metal Podcast. My name is Dan. I'll be your host for this evening. And with me this week is actually another podcast host, which is Mr. Joshua Toomey of the Talk Toomey Podcast. How are you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was talking about a minute ago, before all these lovely people could hear us talking, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to ask you tonight is kind of stuff that you've probably already talked about on various other podcasts. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of those stories and kind of meld them down into one cohesive narrative. I'm
just curious to see if you've done your homework and if you have any good questions for me.
Oh man, homework? No. The whole point of this is for you to talk more than me, which is kind of a challenge, I'll admit. But we're gonna try to keep this one all about you, and so I'm just gonna be kind of guiding the conversation. So in guiding it, I have to ask where you grew up and what got you into music, primarily as a fan of music first, and then we'll move later on into like when you started playing.
Wow, we're going that far back, huh? Born and raised in Owensboro, Kentucky, the birthplace of Johnny Depp and myself. And then my dad and I, after my parents divorced, moved to Nashville when I was around 10. And then throughout all that time, though, I mean, I was getting into music. My older cousins, they were checking out Kiss and Alice Cooper, and I was listening to things like Jerry Lee Lewis and just things you would listen to while living in Kentucky. And then we moved to Tennessee when I was roughly 10. I had a friend that had Injustice for All, kind of got me into that. And then the Black Album by Metallica came out, and when I was about 11 or 12, that's when that came out and kind of changed the course of my musical tastes for a very long time. Got me much into heavier stuff like Slayer, and that went on to Pantera. And man. And then somewhere in there, I started playing bass and, wanting to be Cliff Burton and Jason Newsted and Rex. Yeah, started playing music and just getting heavily into more music. And that would be into my teenage years.
Nice. So what made you decide to play? Did you start on bass or did you play anything else prior to bass?
I started on bass because everyone at my lunchroom in the I guess it was 8th grade, everyone at my lunchroom table in the 8th grade was like, I want to be a guitar player. And my dad's actually had a friend that had a Southern rock tribute band, and we went to see his band practice. And even going back further, my dad had a cousin who was like, he would show up to the family reunion with like the cutoff shirt, the permed hair, the big 80s glasses, some cutoff shorts, looked totally out of an 80s rock video. And he was a drummer. And I went over to his house one time, played his drums. And so from there, I thought I was going to be a drummer. And then so we go to this band practice a few years later, and I was wanting to play the drums still. And the drummer there was left-handed. So I was like, well, shit, I can't, play the drums on a left-handed drum kit.
Right.
So the bass player actually handed me his bass. He's like, well, try this on. And I stood there and like, this is awesome. And from about that point on, I started saving my allowance and lunch money and saved up about $100 to buy a really crappy P-bass copy.
When you started playing bass, were you playing just to play, or was there already like a band sort of situation going on?
No, I was playing just to play. I would buy tab books and learned a ton of early Metallica. That was also kind of you would go by Guitar World and they would have tab for, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and things like that too. So I was kind of learning all of that stuff. And then through a friend, I met some guys that were a couple years older than me, because I was in the 8th grade and these guys were like in the 10th grade. So they might as well have been, 1,000 years older than me. But one of them actually needed to borrow my bass because his bass player broke his bass or something. So I was like, yeah, that's fine, just to kind of meet these guys. So that I let them borrow my bass. And then the next time I saw them, I was actually playing, they needed a bass player. But yeah, I mean, by the time I made it to high school, they needed a bass player. I was a bass player, but I mean, we were only doing like Metallica covers. Like we were just a straight up Metallica cover band at that time.
So a lot of Metallica covers. So no Megadeth, only Metallica. We
didn't really stray into Megadeth, and actually I went down a deep dive about a year ago, even recently going down the Dave Ellefson rabbit hole of bass lines. There's zero chance I could have played those as a 13, 14-year-old kid.
It would have been rough. Well, that was kind of my question too, because I was like, if you guys were playing Metallica covers and you were trying to learn more about the bass, Megadeth has kind of a little bit more rich of a, well, I wouldn't say, I guess it depends on what era Metallica you're playing, right? Because the Cliff Burton stuff was probably pretty tough starting out, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the first Metallica song I played from start to finish was For Whom the Bell Tolls. I mean, I would love to see how horribly I was playing it back then, but yeah, I mean, it was definitely an adventure into learning how to play bass.
Now, was there like a, I don't want to say a market, but like an audience for Metallica cover bands at the time, or was this just, well, like, I guess, is this a garage thing, or is this a, like, you guys went out and would play some Metallica songs at like bars and stuff? Oh no, this was 100% just in the, actually my friend Eli lived in a duplex and we practiced in his room. We played I think we played 2 parties and it was just Metallica covers, but I mean, it was 1993-ish. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there was definitely a market at the time for a good Metallica cover band. Yeah, it's wild because in St. Louis we had nothing. We never got to see anything like that. I mean, I'm sure there were tons of kids in garages playing Metallica, but yeah, we never got to see it. But what led you into a band called 12 Volt Negative Earth, or were there bands before that?
I mean, honestly, like the Metallica cover band kind of morphed into, we were playing a couple of some original stuff. And then somewhere around my senior year of high school, a friend of mine whose dad is big in the like flamenco guitar world, he had a home studio. You got to remember, this is Nashville, Tennessee, actually technically Hendersonville, Tennessee, where Johnny Cash lived for years, and Conway Twitty, and like there's just everyone's dad except mine was in a band.
Right.
I was like, oh, like, my friend Eli's, ex-girlfriend was, her dad was one of the Oak Ridge Boys. I mean, it was just like one of those, everybody was somebody's aunt, uncle, and all this other nonsense. So, he had an 8-track recording studio at his house, and this band Adrenaline Hammer had come to the house to record, just an 8-track demo. And that was the coolest demo I had ever heard. And we had a snow day at his house, and we were playing, Mike Tyson's Punch Out or something, and just listening to that demo over and over. And I thought that the singer was the coolest dude I'd ever seen. Songs were awesome, very, Life of Agony-ish. And I was like, man, this is awesome. So my friend Jason Barnett, he ended up joining the band as a second guitar player, and they started practicing at his house. So the house I hung out at anyway became their practice space. And so I would go, just hang out like, most kids do. And they were all, I think, just graduated high school. I think they were maybe a year or 2 older than me. And so I was still a senior in high school. And they're coming over, they're rehearsing, just blowing me away. And that people my age could be this good in a band. And one day, man, their bass player just didn't show up. Like, he just didn't show up for whatever reason. And like, I was sitting there and they were like, man, we really need to find a bass player. And, I'm like 17 and I'm like, excuse me. Like, I'm a bass player. And they're like, well, learn a couple of these songs and have an audition type deal. And I actually, so this is so strange. I actually auditioned with the old bass player there because he ended up leaving the band. He quit, but he still was friends with them.
Right.
So I ended up having to audition with the bass player there, nervous as hell. Got through the audition, and I actually played a couple of shows with them kind of before they even told me I was in the band. and
well, they were desperate. They needed somebody.
They didn't want me in the band because I was 17, and a lot of the clubs were 18 and over clubs and stuff. So it was I wasn't going to turn 18 for another 9 months or so. And then after, a couple of shows, and I was flyering, back in the day when we would flyer, I was making flyers and getting friends to shows and, just working as hard as I could to just get in this band. I was like, I wanted it more than anything type deal. And after I think the second or third show, we got in the band together, started doing a few more shows under the name Adrenaline Hammer, which I never really cared for that name. But then we changed our name to 12 Volt Negative Earth. When would that be? That was like December of '96. And then like literally, man, like the big club here was called Lucy's Record Shop, and it held almost 200 people. And our first headlining show there, we sold it out. And it was not it wasn't just a thing where people showed up to that place all the time. It was like a true people were there to see us sell out. And so basically I'm still in high school selling out the cool punk rock club. It was awesome.
That is cool. And that was all through old school flyer work.
Flyering, word of mouth. The demo was floating around. They had a following before I joined. It wasn't, brand new, but I think that everything was just kind of building to this big crescendo. And it was weird because we had the kind of fans that wouldn't go watch the opening band because it was an all ages club. They didn't sell beer. So we would all congregate in this bank parking lot across the street, and everybody would have something in their cars, some sort of alcoholic beverages in the car. And so you would go watch the opening bands, and there would be 10, 15 people in there. And I would start to get nervous, like, man, tonight's going to suck really bad. And then we would, go in, set up, and basically turn around and the place would be full. It was so bizarre, but yeah, man, they would never go in and watch the opening bands. And it's funny because some of those opening bands would eventually be, members of, Five Finger Death Punch. Now you would have seen Chris Cale's early band Cut Love Kill, or you would have seen St. Louis's own Big Blue Monkey a few times, that became Story of the Year. So, we had tons of opening bands that would come through that went on to become, massive bands.
And then you guys ended up recording was it a full length? I know it's all on Spotify now, and I've been kind of throwing it on every now and again to get myself more well acquainted. But you guys ended up recording with Fred Coury from Cinderella.
Yeah, the original Fred Coury demo is not on Spotify. We originally did like an entire album with Fred Coury. And the way we met Fred Coury was when I was working at a big used record store called The Great Escape in Nashville. One of the guys he opened a used record store in Hendersonville, which is where I lived. It was on my way home from school. So I would go in and just talk to him every day. He was like the record store guy. He was full of knowledge. Mike Richards was his name. We're friends on Facebook now, which is kind of awesome. But I would go in there, man, and he would just tell me about the old days in Nashville and, playing with the Stray Cats and just all this crazy stuff from obviously before I was in the scene. And one day I went in there and he goes, he's like, man, Fred Coury from Cinderella was just in here, and he's opening a studio in town and he's looking for bands to record. And I was like, well, give him my number. I've got my new band, 12 Volt Negative Earth. And so I got Fred's number. And this has always been like the funny part looking back on it, because this is 1996, 1997 when I talked to Fred. And I kind of missed the glam thing. Like the glam thing just did not, it wasn't cool in 1997. It was over. And so there was a time where it was just like, oh, you record with that guy? We got some blowback for working with him. Now it's cool. Now it's like, oh man, you recorded with Fred Coury from Cinderella, the guy that played the Moscow Music Peace Festival. But back then it was kind of weird, man. We almost kind of got lumped into like a hair metal thing for a second before people heard us. So like, why are you working with that guy? But I learned a lot from him. I asked him a ton of questions. I remember one day I went in with the kind of naivety of being 17, 18, and we were playing our demo, and I was like, man, we're going to have the best sounding demo in Nashville. And he looked over at me and he goes, that's not how you want to think. You want to think you're having the best sounding demo in the world or something like, think bigger. I was like, oh man, that's, so wise, Fred Corey. But yeah, it was really awesome to meet him. And he took a liking to the band, and he was one of my first guests on Talk Toomey. I know we're not there yet, but I was asking him about his growing up and all that stuff. But then when I talked about the band time, I've had a lot of my friends say he really perks up when he talks about, working with us and stuff. So I think he really enjoyed working with us. We actually ended up replacing our drummer while working with him. And for a minute, I think he was really trying to get in the band. And we were like, no, Fred Corey, you can't be in our band.
Oh, no.
Which again, now would be awesome, back in 1997 to have, it would be like having Bret Michaels join your band or something.
Right. It's like the wise old man decides he wants to go out, on the adventure with everybody. It's like, no. We just want your knowledge. We can't be seen with you. And that is so weird how different perceptions were, especially back then, where just the assumption of like, oh, instead of people saying, oh yeah, you're working with this famous musician that has all these years of experience and wow, that's going to be really good for you. It's like, what do you guys hair metal know? It's like, right. Yeah, very, very, very strange. I'd like to say people have changed since then, but I mean, not so much, not really.
And we actually went out and that's when we were very Life of Agony influenced, and then the new metal thing happened, and we were very kind of in that vein of new metal and everything else. But we were also all listening to like punk rock and stuff, and like Henry Rollins' Get in the Van was something I read all the time. It was almost like a how-to guide how to be in a band. And so we came out the gate, man. Like I graduated in like June of 97, and we had our first ever, quote unquote tour, I think, booked within a month or two after that. And we ended up picking up some shows on the way while we were out. We would be off in a city, and the club we were supposed to play in 2 days had a show today. And so there was 2 days where one day we had a day off, and we were in Indianapolis, and I called Fred for something. I forget what I was calling him about. He's like, what are you guys doing? I was like, well, we have a day off. We're in Indianapolis hanging out. He's like, well, get to St. Louis and you can open for us, because Cinderella had gone back out on the road. And so we drove from Indy to St. Louis to open for Cinderella at Pops.
Oh, nice.
And it was very eye-opening to see. I played Pops a couple of times, from 12 volt, and then even in Primer we played at Pops a couple times, but I'd never seen that many people. Like there were people everywhere, like upstairs, downstairs, like just hanging off the rafters for Cinderella. But then so we play with Cinderella, and then the next day we drive to Akron, Ohio, because we have a show like the day after, and we pull up to the venue where we're supposed to play, and Earth Crisis is playing.
Oh,
and
nice.
Earth Crisis, and no one that was on the tour with Earth Crisis made it to the show. Don't know what happened. Don't know why. So Earth Crisis has 0 opening bands, and I hear them talking. I hear people talking, and I'm like, well, we're here. We can open. And so we ended up. So one night we opened for Cinderella. The next night we opened for Earth Crisis.
That's awesome. That's such a wide range of audience.
Right.
So out of those two shows, which show do you think the band was the most well received at?
I think people really loved us at the Cinderella show. I don't think people really. That was the time when our style and hardcore didn't really mesh. Mesh. Even though we were all big fans of Earth Crisis and Hatebreed and all that stuff at the time, what we were playing was not conducive to what they were doing.
Well, it sounds like everything was going relatively well for the band. So I would be remiss to ask what ultimately ended up happening with that band.
Well, I mean, over time, like we did the thing with Fred Corey. Then we ended up recording the first album that's on Spotify called Where Did All the Sunshine Go? The house engineer at the punk rock club that we played also had a recording studio. So we assumed that guy would know what we sounded like. and we went in and recorded it. I think we did it in like 4 days, 4 or 5 days, like start to finish. I mean, it's fun listening to it now, but I mean, I there's mess ups all over that thing, but it's gives it the charm or something. But we put that out, pressed it. We did the CD release. The CD release show was insane. Like they literally had to lock the door to the club because people were still trying to get in. It was pandemonium at the 12 volt negative earth show. It was just talking about this with one of our old guitar players the other day. When we sold a ton of merch that night, like the most merch we'd ever sold ever. And we took out like $1,000 loan from our drummer's grandma. I mean, it was just one of those, like we had to find the money any way we could. And we ended up going back to our drummer's house and just set the money in stacks of like 100, like hundreds. And it was like we were in Breaking Bad. I mean, it was like the most money I'd ever seen in my life. We paid off the loan. We had some more money left over for this, that, and the other thing. The bad part about all of that was we never reinvested any of that stuff. It was like, if we made $30 at a show, we'd be like, sweet, we all have $6, Like,
now let's immediately go to McDonald's and yeah.
Right. It was awful.
Yeah, that's rough. Nobody really teaches band finance.
So, I mean, that's a lot of the early guests of the Talk Toomey show and stuff like that. The were people I met through that time period, because we were, that was from 96 to about 2001, 2002 is when I was in that band. And we were constantly out, touring weekends and playing shows. And, we got to open for the Reformed Misfits, and we opened for, Limp Bizkit on that album. We did, there was just so many bands that came through that anytime a big band would come through, they would call, the promoters would call and say, hey, do you guys want to open for this? Do you want to open for that? And, so we ended up playing with a bunch of cool people, playing the big, local rock fest here and playing, they had the big stage outside the Titan Stadium, got to play one of those festivals and things like this. So, I mean, there was always something going on. And then, like we said earlier, that Fred Corey went on tour with Cinderella. Then he comes back to town. He sees that we've still progressed. He really liked the first album, but he wanted to do a good sounding, kind of second album type deal. So we ended up doing an EP with him. That's the Baby Steps EP, which is now on Spotify too. And then, we were just continuing to shop the stuff, and we actually got, Monty Connor from Roadrunner reached out, had us do some more demos for him. We did some stuff for TVT Records. We went to New York and did a showcase for them. So, I mean, it was like people were kind of poking around, seeing what we were doing, but it never amounted to much, but it was a lot of fun.
So everybody just decided one day, like, yeah, I guess we're done doing this, or.
It was, we were very Zayo-ish in the fact that we changed members a lot.
I got that reference.
We had a few different, we had a few different drummers. We changed guitar players at one point. It was just kind of, the internal struggle of a local band trying to get to the next level. And, we would go on tour, and this guy drank too much, and this guy would do this, and this guy would just get on my nerves because of that. And then around 2001, that's when the original post for the Primer 55 bass player popped up on the PRP. And through 12 Volt Negative Earth, I had a relationship with the guy that runs the PRP, who still runs the PRP. And I emailed him and I said, hey, do you have a contact for Bobby Burns? And he's like, yeah. Because I'd actually met Bobby when Baby Steps came out. We weren't able to tour for some reason. I forget what it was. But so my drummer and I, we were following Korn's Sick and Twisted tour, and we were just selling CDs outside the venue for like $5 a piece. And it was crazy. You could just walk up to a group of people and be like, hey, I'm out selling this CD, blah, blah, blah. It's $5. And people were just buying them up like no big deal. And so Stained was on that tour, and Stained had an off show in Louisville. And Primer 55 was, the big local band. They had just had the new album come out. The first album came out, and they were the opening band. And then Stained canceled, so Primer ended up doing a full, hour and a half set. And I met Bobby afterwards and talked to him for a little while. And there was just something really cool about him, man. He was just had an air about him. It was like, if you want to go somewhere, get around this guy. And yeah, so I mean, from that moment on, I was like, man, that Bobby Burns is one awesome dude, and I want to be in a band with that guy. And so when the post came up that they were looking for a bass player, I ended up reaching out to him. And Nashville to Louisville is about 3 hours. So I was actually coming up here to audition before the second album came out. And then they would have drummers come in to audition. So I would come up and I would play those auditions too. Like I was in the mix for the bass player position. And I told him later on the story, which is kind of funny, knowing the band dynamic now. And my move that I did was they were just like, we're still in the studio. We're still trying to find the right person. We really like you, but we don't know. And it was just a whole lot of like dragging their feet. And I'm still back home trying to do 12 volt. And so it got to a point where I was just like, I need to know now. So I called Jason, vocalist Jason, and I was like, I need to know now. If you can't tell me now, just pull my name. You know, I'm trying to do a power move on him.
Classic power play.
And then he basically says, you know, well, I can't say anything right now. And so I was just like, well, pull my name. And he was like, okay. And then the next thing I know that they get, Kobe from, I don't know what band he was in before that, but yeah, Kobe Jackson ended up, doing the initial touring for the second album. So that's part of the primer story there.
Yeah. So you, eventually though, they dropped that dude or he quit or something along those lines. And then had you put your name back into the hat at some point? Or was it just like they just remembered you and called you when they needed a bass player?
So what happened with the second time around was so I'm still in 12 volt and it's just like we're ramming our heads into the wall. Like it just wasn't coming together. And I just packed up my stuff one day and I was just like, you know what, guys, I'm done. I had no backup plan, nothing in the works. And I just kind of drove away and I had like 3 contacts in music. And it was Bobby Burns, it was Mikey from Spineshank, and probably Wookiebus from the PRP. Like those are probably my 3 contacts I had. And I emailed all 3 of them. I'm like, hey, I'm not in a band anymore. Anybody need a bass player kind of thing. And Bobby actually wrote me back saying that he was going to he wanted to start a side project after this next primer tour when he got home. And he's like, come up to Louisville. I want to play you these demos. Tell me what you think. So I drove up to Louisville. We drove around the city. He had the cassette in his car, CD in his car, whatever. I mean, the demos were good, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter what he played me. I was going to be like, yeah, I'm in. And so I was like, yeah, man, I'd love to do this. When you get home from this tour, we're going to do this. And so I go back I was delivering pizza at the time. I go back to my delivery job. And one day he calls me and he's like, hey man, Kobe quit or Kobe left, or we need a bass player. Can you learn the set in 2 days? And I was like, yeah, I can learn the set in 2 days or whatever. And so yeah, he just sent me the list of songs to learn. I learned, as best I could at the time. And I actually bought an edited version of the CD. And so one day when I was playing a part of the CD, I was like, hey, what's going on right here? He was like, is this the edited version? I was like, yeah, it was the only one they had at, the used record store. I was like, shut up. But yeah, man. So I ended up just kind of jumping on the they called it the $12 Riot Tour. It was Dope, Skin Lab, Primer 55, and Society 1. And so, yeah, so basically, one day I'm delivering pizza, the next day I'm in Brooklyn, playing L'Amour's with, Primer. It was pretty nuts, man. It was for as much as I thought I knew from 12 volt, it was definitely an entirely new world being out there in a, quote unquote professional band.
Sure. Yeah. It had to have been a totally different world. And, did that ever take any kind of toll on you as far as like, because I know you had traveled with 12 volt, but it doesn't sound like it was kind of quite at the same level. Was it kind of something to get used to, or were you just like ready for it, like ready for the road?
I mean, I was definitely ready for the road. I mean, we had done 12 volt did these like, couple week tours at a time or extended weekends. We drove across country a few times to play, in Arizona and things like that. So, I mean, we had traveled a lot. And this was, I think, 6 weeks of touring. So, I mean, it was definitely they always talk about like Warped Tour being, punk rock boot camp or something. This was definitely a wake up call into kind of how to be in a band, how to look in a band, how to act in a band. It was definitely much different. It definitely was not, I met these dudes as a kid and we grew up together and now we've made it. I was walking into a band that had already made it and was established and was almost, more of a business than like a brotherhood kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, just the concept of having to learn all of these new personality types and learn how to kind of get along while also having the dynamic of being the new guy.
Oh, it was that part was awful. Like I've said this before a couple of times. I mean, they all collectively hated each other, but I was the new guy. So they kind of came together to kind of just give me shit. Like it was on a much smaller level, on a minute level. It was kind of like the hazing that they gave Jason Newsted in Metallica. It was like, where they just kind of gave him shit the entire time he was in the band. Like there were definitely trips where I was wearing headphones listening to whatever CD and the CD would go off, but I would leave the headphones on because I knew if I had the headphones on, they thought I was listening to music and they wouldn't bother me. But it was like, as soon as I took the headphones off, it was like time to give you shit.
Right. So after being hazed for a good amount of time, I mean, I feel like that was kind of the era of Primer where, they'd kind of just, I don't want to say fizzled out because it sounds like, according to you, that Primer went on for a considerable amount of time after putting out that second record.
Yeah. I mean, well, the second album came out in 2001. I joined the band in 2002. We did that tour. And then after that tour, we came home. And actually that's when the band did dissolve after that. And Bobby and I did do the side band after, for a while. It actually included Jason Daunt from Flaw was in it for a little bit. And, but that went absolutely nowhere. And so from 2004 to 2007, we did a little bit of music here and there. I mean, I filled in for bass with this, a band out of South Carolina that needed a bass player for a quick tour. And the reason I did the quick tour in the band, they were out of Myrtle Beach. And the reason I did it was I saw the tour itinerary and they played CBGBs. And I was like, well, fuck, I get to play CBGBs if I do this gig.
Right.
So I did that quick tour. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't the legendary CBG. It was like 2004, I think, when I did that. And so it was kind of the end of CBGBs. It was still cool to be there still, but I mean, it's not like anybody was there to see me. It was just cool to play that room. But yeah, I mean, I just did some stuff here and there. I did a couple other local bands, here in town. And then in 2007, I got the itch to play again because I'd stopped playing for a year or so. Sounds like a very small amount of time talking about it now, but it seemed like forever back then. But as soon as I was kind of put myself back out there, I joined another band, and then I get rumblings that Primer is putting out a kind of a greatest hits, a B-sides album, and that they were going to talk about touring on it. And I called Bobby and I'm like, hey, what's this deal about this album? He's like, well, we're about to go on tour and I guess we do need a bass player and you were the last bass player. So I guess it's you.
Right.
So we ended up doing another. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It wasn't like a huge, party coming home, but it was, Bobby and I were always cool through all that. That's the one thing that, Bobby has a really bad reputation in the scene or in the music business to kind of being hard to work with. But, I think I broke through the barriers with him and he actually ended up being one of my better friends through all that stuff. So we ended up doing, another run in 2007. And that's when our singer lost his mind and he ended up quitting, or we fired him, whatever we did at the time. And we ended up getting a replacement singer that was just terrible.
That always sounded so bizarre because I remember reading about that. I was like, how can you just grab another guy from a legacy act and just throw him up on stage to play the song? Like it's strange now. I mean, I get why it was done, but it's just very strange.
I mean, we just had a tour booked. We took a couple of days off. We, found this other dude and we just kept going. It was like, just when it's kind of like when the wheels are turning, you just got to keep it going. And so, yeah, we did what we had to do to keep it going. But man, this dude that he had all the lyrics printed out. He had them on the stage. And I remember one night he just pissed me off and I kicked him. I kicked them into the crowd and they ended up tearing them up. It was kind of, it was like Alice Cooper throwing that chicken into the crowd or whatever. And just like, they just tore them all to pieces. But yeah, I was just so, me and that guy did not get along, but yeah. And then we ended up coming home and we had another tour coming up, and it was just one of those things where, I was making more money at the job that I had. And I had a young son at the time. And my daughter was young at the time. I thought at the time too, and so it was pointless. It was like there's no reason to be on tour playing Joe's Bar and Grill to 8 people in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Like this is going nowhere kind of thing. So actually, I told him originally that I was just going to take a tour off kind of deal and save some money up and we'll do some stuff next time kind of deal. And, next time never came.
Sure. Yeah.
Hey, give me 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had to get some more water.
I know this is kind of a weird role reversal here, but I feel like total garbage. So I appreciate you so much for this because there's a lot of stuff that like I've heard you talk about, as far as like bands and stuff like that, but I've never really gotten to have it kind of strung together in a narrative that makes sense. So I try to make these as autobiographical as possible. So, again, never happened. And I mean, in 2007, it's not like you guys were going out and like nu metal was like having the resurgence that it's having now. Like, I feel like if a band like Primer went on tour like right now, it would be like a totally different story. Well, obviously not right now, but you know what I'm saying? But like, within the last year or two, had gone out on tour, it would have been probably a different story. So did you just kind of stop playing for a number of years, or is there really a gap? Or I guess what I'm trying to figure out is the gap in this story for me is where, Primer had kind of gone away, and you're saying that's 2007 versus whenever you started the podcast.
Yeah. Let's see, 2007, early 2008 is when I left Primer, didn't come back. 2009, we did a 10-year anniversary 12 Volt Negative Earth show. And somewhere around there is when I started working in like residential care for like abused kids. And so I did that for like 3 years, and that job took a toll. Like it's just, social work kind of stuff, but you're also dealing with kids that live in a group home. And so, yeah, I did that until like 2012-ish, 2013. Honestly, it was too hard to go to work every day at some point. 2013-ish, actually, I got up and played a little bit with Primer at a show here right outside Louisville. Did a song with them that night. And then 2014 comes around. I started checking out internet radio. I still wasn't listening to podcasts yet. But internet radio stations were kind of starting to pop up, and even, Sirius Satellite Radio was probably still big at the time.
Pandora was all that huge at that time. Yeah. Yeah.
Pandora was definitely huge. So I was looking into how to become like kind of like an online DJ. And so I had some friends back from 12 Volt Negative Earth days that were the local buzz, the local, Sunday nights at 10, the local show. I reached out to my friend Al John Go, who did the local show, and I'm like, hey, what does it take to do internet radio? And honestly, it was kind of funny. He never actually got back to me. And then almost a year to the day, I got a job with my current job with the post office, and the building that I work in doesn't get good internet. Like, you doesn't get any, on your phone or whatever, your phone's data plan doesn't work in there. So I was trying to find stuff to download to listen to while I was at work. And, I started looking into it. Obviously the big names popped up, Josta Show, Joe Rogan, Chris Hardwick at the time, all that stuff. So I started listening to podcasts, and then about a year later, the whole time I'm like, man, I could do this. I think I could do this. It's like the more I listen, I'm like, I could do this. And so that just kind of takes you to about 2015. And I was sitting on the couch, and I looked at my wife at the time, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna I think I'm going to start a podcast.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm going to call it. And then I was like, I think I want to call it either. It was the two names were Talk To Me or Speak To Me. And obviously I went with Talk To Me and ordered a mic off Amazon. And I literally just recorded an interview and like within a week put it up. Like there was no promotion. There was no nothing. It was just, hey, I have a podcast now. Even on the first episode of the podcast, I go and on, and the guest this week is blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I didn't even say like, hey, this is, it was just like a continuation from a week that never happened.
Sure. Well, and so you had to just kind of on the fly learn how to like edit and post and get hosting and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty much just like the first hosting site that I saw that didn't seem like a scam and how to edit and how to. I think there was an episode that I've had the guy Jason T. Smith on my show a lot. He was reality TV thrift hunters and things like that. And and I was like, hey man, I would like to have you on my show because I was trying to find guests anywhere I could. And he's like, well, let me check out your show. And I sent him an episode. And I played a song after the interview, and the interview is really quiet. And then the song comes down and like, boom, just blew out. He's like, man, man, you really need to check your levels. And I was like, I guess I do. And that's when I got a little bit more involved in the levels and everything else. But yeah, so it was definitely a learning experience. I don't think I liked an episode of my podcast until like episode 20. I think the first Mark Rizzo episode was the one where I was like, all right, now I like this, but not that I don't listen to him, and I can't listen to him at all now anyway because I can't stand the sound of my voice. But
yeah, I feel that for me, not for you. But like the cool thing that I noticed about your podcast right away, whenever I was introduced, it was actually Travis from As the Story Grows that got me turned on to Talk To Me, and it was interesting to me, like just the caliber of guests that you had at the time. I mean, I think you were either at already almost 100 episodes or maybe even more, when I started listening. And I was just completely blown away. What was the struggle like as far as like trying to get bigger name guests earlier on? And the type of, because like, I know from my own experience, which I won't get into here, that can be a little bit kind of an uphill battle.
Well, I mean, the crazy part about the whole getting the big name guests on it was it kind of went back to all these shows that I played growing up, just not being a dick. It was making friends with everybody, and so my first episode was Barry Donegan, who was kind of a local guy in Nashville, has a band called Look What I Did. And I was like, well, I'll reach out to him and interview him. And I was like, all right, cool. Episode 2 was, Billy Gray from Fozzy, who Billy Gray, the second time we did Primer, was in Primer. So, I mean, I was in the band with him. Third guest out of the gate is Frank Threegren from Hatebreed, who I had a email relationship with because he posted about liking Kiss memorabilia. I had a piece of Kiss memorabilia that he didn't have. I sold it to him for a good price. And then so when I had a podcast, I'm like, hey, I have a podcast. Would you like to do it? He's like, sure. Fred Corey, episode 4, obviously easy get. Episode 5, Bobby Burns. Episode 6, Chris Cale from Five Finger Death Punch. Chris Cale, he replaced me, and he was in 12 Volt Negative Earth after I left. The third 12 Volt album that's on Spotify, the Heroes Defeated album, he's on that. He played bass on that and sang backups on that. So it's like, I've known him since 1996, 97, so it was just like one of those things. Virus episode 7 obviously toured with Dope. And so when you go to the new guests, whoever it was, I think, episode 9, Alexis Brown from Straight Line Stitch. I've known her since she was like 16 because she had local bands in Nashville. So, I mean, it was a lot of people I knew from back in the day. So you start to kind of get that roster together of big names. And so when you go to the publicist or you go to the artist Facebook or something, you can be, hey, I had Chris Kell from Five Finger Death Punch on the show.
Right.
And they're like, oh, well, you must be legit. So here's, Joey Z from Life of Agony or something. It's all smoke and mirrors over here at the Talk To Me compound.
Or they come back at you and say, well, how many followers do you have on Facebook? Yeah, or like,
right. You're like, I'm sorry, this is, yeah, I hate that question. How many downloads do you have? I'm like, enough.
all of them. Yeah, I have all the
Yeah.
downloads. Yeah, like don't even worry about it. That was the thing that really stood out to me, and it makes sense. And it's weird too, because I think I listened to maybe like 15 or 16 episodes before I realized that you had been in Primer, and that it was this whole thing. And so that was super cool. And I know that you're like super chill and you never get intimidated about talking to anybody, ever. But if you ever did, what interview made you the most nervous going into it?
Let's see. I mean, early on, I had Jim Brewer on early, and that freaked me the fuck out.
Yeah.
And getting home for that one. But there's one that I always go back to, which is, where's it at? Jeff Walker of Carcass.
That was a good one.
It was just like, he's one of those dudes that growing up watching Headbangers Ball and just loving Heartwork. Like, Heartwork was my jam for so many years, and then basically I was emailing back and forth with him, and he's doing the interview, and like, that's the one that I got home from work, and I was super nervous. That one, even the day, obviously David Ellefson of Megadeth, he was on really early too, like episode 40. So there was definitely some big names early on, and it was all just from connections and getting the in biblical terms, this guest begat that guest,
Right.
and you just kind of work that way. And yeah, so early on, man, I was getting those big name guests right out the gate. It was crazy.
What's been the most difficult thing for you as far as maintaining a podcast for as long as you have? You've been in the game for more than a minute at this point.
Just the main thing, just trying to just keep it interesting and keep it going, and just finding there are definitely weeks where I'm like, the main thing that works for me is the fact that I have a set day that I put it out on. Like, if I didn't have a set day that I put it out on, there are a lot of times that, I might put it out on, they should come out on Thursdays. So, if it's a big guest that say something crazy, it might come out on Wednesday. But if it's, or I might slack and put it out on Friday. But for the most part, they come out on Thursday. So, that's the thing where, if by Monday and Tuesday, you're like, shit, I got to get this together. If it was the thing where you just put it out whenever you have a guest and you're done with the episode, I don't think I would nearly have as many episodes.
Sure. So you have recently started a new podcast about your favorite band in the entire world, Pantera. So I guess it'd be kind of dumb for me to ask you what inspired you to start that podcast, because I already know what the answer is, but I'll ask it anyway. So, like, what made you feel like that there was a lack of Pantera podcasts out there?
Well, the fact that there are 0 Pantera podcasts out there, it's. I'd always talked about doing a Metallica one, and that was before Ryan J. Downey's and Metal Up Your Podcast. Or whatever.
Yeah,
like
that was great. Yeah.
There was a few that kind of popped up, and I was like, well, that idea is taken. And I've been talking about this for a long time, for probably 2 years. Like, just like, I really, it was like, somebody needs to do a Pantera podcast. And I brought it up to my wife, a few months ago, and she's like, well, why don't you do it? I'm like, I don't know, and then you got to do this, you got to do that. She's like, just do it. And I'm like, well, and it's funny. My first guest was Terry Glaze, the original singer of Pantera. That was on the first 3 albums. I had messaged him on Facebook 2 years ago to come on Talk Toomey, and he never got back to me. And I was like, well, whatever. He might not be doing interviews or whatever. And the other day, when I'm starting to look at, because the basis of the Pantera podcast, Drag the Waters, the Pantera podcast, is to get people in the Pantera world, obviously members, past members, the crew members, people that worked on albums, and then also, kind of in the vein of Speak and Destroy, a band that may have toured with them, or a band that was, or a band member that was inspired by them, just a big fan kind of thing. So it's a pretty wide universe, because Pantera, unlike a lot of bands, they put out the home videos, and the home videos would shine a spotlight on the crew. So there's crew members of Pantera that Pantera fans know as well as the band. So there's a lot of people kind of in that world of Pantera. And so I go back, and I'm starting to look through my phone again because I'm friends with a lot of them on Facebook, not like buddies, but a friend on Facebook as much as that's a friend. And I was messaging a couple of them again, like, hey, I'm doing this project kind of based on Pantera. Would love to talk to you about Pantera. And Terry Glaze actually got back to me this time. He was like, oh man, I didn't see your last messages. Sometimes they get lost in the shuffle. But I was like, well, actually, this is perfect timing because who was the best guest to have on the first episode other than someone that was in the, basically on the first album. So it kind of worked out, man. It was a very cool conversation. Very cool to talk to that guy. I said on the episode today that he, the interview is about 35 minutes, but we talked for another 35 minutes after the thing was off. And, it was very, very cool to talk to somebody that was kind of, there at the beginning.
That's one of the coolest things about doing these shows too, doing these interviews is the stuff that you get to talk about in a non-official capacity, I think is almost, there's been plenty of interviews that I've done where I almost wish that we had recorded what we talked about after we were done recording but obviously, not all that stuff is always.
Yeah. Well, I mean, once you say like, thanks for coming on, appreciate you, the interview's over and the unspoken rule of, even though it might be recorded, you can't post the good stuff. Right.
Absolutely. But no, that's cool. And so this isn't just going to be like a series type of thing. This is going to be an ongoing, is it going to be weekly or just kind of, I guess it would be dependent on how easy it'll be to get a hold of everybody.
Right. Yeah. I've got the second, I don't know when this is going to be released, but I've got the second interview recorded. I interviewed the co-author of the Rex Brown book, Mark Eglinton. Kind of got the inside story of working with Rex and even being around because he went on a tour with Down for a few shows, so he was kind of around that camp for a little bit, and there's obviously a lot of turmoil around the Rex Brown book. So he kind of explained his side of the story with all that stuff too. So yeah, so episode 2 is kind of right out the gate fun too.
Well, that's awesome. There's a lot to look forward to then in the future. I think diversification of content has kind of been the thing I've noticed, especially this year in lockdown, that we've kind of all been doing as podcasters is kind of throwing. I mean, this is technically a sub podcast and that's technically a sub podcast. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really cool. It's really cool to see that because everybody's kind of just sitting around wondering what's going to happen. And it almost feels like an obligation at this point to give people more content, something else to do.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing with, also, with Talk Toomey being the main show. I mean, and you've listened to enough episodes to know that, if the guy that I'm talking to toured with Pantera at some point, I'm going to ask him, hey, you toured with Pantera in 1994. What was that like? And so it's kind of been a running theme through the show anyway. And I'm actually taking clips from the old shows, the old Talk Toomeys, and putting them in the new show. So like the show with Terry Glaze, I went back to my first talk with Max Cavalera because he answered the question of what was Dimebag like, and he had this great story about these camouflage pants that Dimebag bought him, and it always sticks with me, like the way he says that Dimebag bought him camouflage pants.
new wave colored camouflage pants.
Yeah. So that was fun to pull that one up. I mean, I can go through and pull different stories out too. So it's gonna be a lot of fun, and it's just honestly just keeps me interested in it. And yeah, so it's the main show is obviously still going to be interview based, and I think I did the Diabolus and Podcastica stuff with Ian Wadley of Rock and Metal Combat, which was way more just commentary based.
Yeah.
And I think I just know I think I just know my lane. I think my lane is just interviewing people because I don't care. I don't care about other people's opinions about music enough to want to argue with them about it. And that's all that show ended up being, was just one giant argument.
Gotcha.
So
I can relate to that.
It was just, as soon as the episode came out, it was just like, I don't even remember saying that. Why is everybody talking about this one section? I was like, all right, whatever. So it just got to a point where it's a little bit too much like just rolling my eyes at people's opinions on my comments. Like, whatever. If you don't like what I say, then my bad.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, man, for coming out for sitting in your own home and dialing a computer phone I think that's what it is, a computer phone. And having this chat. And I think this is going to be cool. And if you guys haven't checked out the Talk Toomey podcast, I'm not really sure what you're doing, but you need to go in and look. It is a 100% bingeable podcast. And there's plenty of content for you guys to check out. So I will leave a link in our show notes that will take you to the world of Joshua Toomey. And thanks so much, man. This was fun.
I appreciate it, man. And make sure you guys go check out that 12-volt Negative Earth on Spotify. That's cool that that's all out there now too.
Absolutely. Get that Spotify revenue.
There you go. Yeah, I need all my money.
And that was my chat with Joshua Toomey of the Talk Toomey Podcast, also the bassist of Primer 55. This was a fun chat. I've been talking with Toomey for, quite a few years now. I guess maybe like 3-4 years, something like that. He was one of my favorite podcasts to listen to before I got into podcasting myself. And it was really, really cool getting to dig into his history as a musician, what got him into music, what got him into all of these things, and what ultimately inspired him to pick up the microphone and do the damn thing, just like we've been doing it, and how he kind of gave guys like me and Joe and Jeff, kind of an inspiration to let our voice be heard, and eventually, to actually get to talk to people. And so his interview style is unmatched. He's one of the best dudes out there as far as entertainment in heavy music, or not always heavy music. Dude is just a pleasure to talk to, a pleasure to listen to. So if you want to follow the Talk Toomey podcast, you can listen to him on every major podcast platform that's out there. And guys, if you're enjoying the Discuss Metal podcast, reach out to us. Let us know who you want to hear us talk to, and we will do our absolute best to make it happen. There's all kinds of ways you can reach out to us. You can follow us on Twitter at Discuss Metal. You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. You can go to our website, discussmetal.com. You can go to our Facebook group at facebook.com/discography discussion. You can join our official group there. We have a Discord server that you can take part in. There will be a link in the show notes that'll take you right to our Discord server. And there are so many different ways you can reach out to us, so please do so. We love hearing from you guys. We hope everybody's had a great Thanksgiving this year, at least you guys that are stateside. And if not, I still, even if you don't live in the States, hope that you had a great year. We've got a great industrial December lined up for you on Discography Discussion, so definitely look forward to that. And for the Discuss Metal podcast, I am Dan, and I hope to hear from you guys very, very, very soon.
This has been Discuss Metal with Joshua Toomey, presented by discussmetal.com.